Hello, I'm a day late, sharing my thoughts on Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, Black Widow. Well, like most things, Black Widow is a product of its time. And to better understand it, you first must place it in its correct time. So even though it is the first movie of Phase 4, the majority of the film actually takes place after the first Phase 3 movie, Civil War, and before the later Phase 3 movie, Infinity War. This leads us to the first problem with the movie. It's a product out of its time. In fact, it's 5 movies too late. At the time of this recording, most who have seen the film saw it in production order, meaning after Endgame. So if you've seen Endgame, you know Natasha lives to appear in that film. So this takes some of the thrill out of the movie, because we know that she lives to make it to see Endgame. The stakes have been lowered somewhat at the very least. I suppose you could make the argument that with most franchise films, say Bond or Mission Impossible and the like, you know that the hero won't die because that would be the end of the franchise, and Hollywood is generally very fond of making money. But there's always a chance that the hero could die, at least a slim one. However, since Black Widow takes place out of sequence, we already know that she survives the movie, and so a little bit of the thrill is gone. And that is even before you see the first frame of film. So I want to do a quick review of the story, and then I'll dissect some of the issues I have with it. We open in Ohio in 1995 with a young Natasha Romanoff riding her bike through a nice suburban neighborhood on her own. This is back when you could do that sort of thing without some hysteric calling Child Protective Services. Anyways, she makes her way home, and we meet the rest of the family. Turns out they are Russian spies, and they're trying to get their mitts on information from the North Institute, and Dad has finally succeeded. They take a small plane and escape to Cuba, evading pursuing S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. Once there, we meet the film's antagonist, Dreykov. He runs the infamous Red Room, and the disc that Alexei has stolen will help perfect the control he has over his Black Widows. They are the female assassins that are created in the Red Room. Natasha and Yelena are then drugged and shipped off to continue their training. Cue opening credits. We get a montage of events that make up the training in the Red Room. We see the power players that Dreykov knows, and hints of how the Black Widows are used. We then open on Natasha washing her face at a sink 21 years later. She looks down at her cell phone where we see video of police converging on their target. Natasha picks up the phone and calls Secretary Ross. This scene exists solely to inform you when in the MCU timeline that the film is taking place, and to remind us that Natasha is on the run. Ross will play no further part in the film until the end. So we cut to Morocco to begin the events that will trigger the rest of the story. We find a sniper on a roof keeping an eye on an unknown female. Before she can shoot, the sniper is seen and the target flees. The sniper notifies her team leader, and it's Yelena, all grown up and a Black Widow herself. Yelena says that she is in pursuit. The target runs into a door that opens, and she stumbles into the street and is hit by an oncoming car. The car drives off because, hey, cop didn't see it, I didn't do it. Yelena shows up and the two fight, with Yelena eventually winning and gutting the target like a fish. A PG-13 fish anyways. Before the target dies, she manages to spray Yelena with a gas that causes her to snap out of her reverie. Yelena says, "What have I done?" With her last breath, the target then says, "Free the others," and hands her the vial that she sprayed Yelena with. Yelena cuts a tracking device out of her leg, grabs the box with the vials, and then books it as the other Black Widow tries to contact her for an update. Getting no answer, the other Black Widow calls Dreykov and requests that they initiate the Taskmaster protocol. We see someone watching the fight between Hawkeye and Black Panther from Civil War. This is the Taskmaster. Another Black Widow comes into the room, plugs a device into the back of the Taskmaster's helmet. And we cut to Norway. We see Natasha as she pulls up to her new home and goes inside to discover Mason asleep on her bed. Mason is her black market supply guy. He's fixed her up with a hideout, food, gas, and new passports and IDs. He even brought her mail from Budapest, where the sharp-eyed will notice the container that Yelena took after she killed the rogue widow in Morocco. Later, the power goes out, and Natasha has to go into town for some gas for the generator. As she's turning onto a bridge, her car is hit by an explosive, and her car is flipped several times and comes to a stop, hanging precariously off the edge of a bridge. The Taskmaster then drives up, and the two fight, trading identical moves until we get the famous pose of the two mirroring each other. But the Taskmaster isn't interested in Natasha. She wants the vials. Natasha tries to ambush the Taskmaster, but is easily rebuffed. so Natasha uses her grappling hook to have it drag the Taskmaster away. Taskmaster cuts the rope, swings back to the car, they fight some more, and the Taskmaster eventually kicks Natasha off of the bridge. The Taskmaster then opens the box to discover that the vials are missing and stares at the river below. Natasha washes up somewhere downstream and pulls the vials from her vest, only to see the pictures of her and Yelena as they were children. Next stop on our global jaunt, Budapest. Natasha goes to her old safe house where she finds Yelena. The two fight, but Nat calls a truce before they kill one another. Yelena says she sent the vials to Natasha so she could give them to someone like Tony Stark to analyze. That it is an antidote to the chemical conditioning that they're using to create Black Widows within the Red Room. Nat is stunned the Red Room still exists since she killed Dreykov. Before we can get some answers, there's an explosion in the living room and a section of the ceiling collapses, with two widows dropping into the room. Yelena sets off several booby traps as a distraction, and she and Natasha flee the apartment. Another widow takes up pursuit. They use a chimney to swing from one building to the next. The pursuing widow falls, and so does Natasha, but Nat hits several things to slow her fall. Dreykov uses his computer to force the widow to kill herself. Just before she does, she says, "I don't want to do this." Yelena shows up and says they've got to go, and they head for Yelena's motorcycle. Just as they get on the motorcycle, an armored personnel carrier crashes through a car and comes to a halt facing them. It's our friend the Taskmaster, and the chase is on. Natasha makes a quick turn through a narrow passage and loses the APC, but a widow on a motorcycle is fast on their heels. They weave in and out of traffic for a while until the pursuing widow shoots them and causes them to crash. Yelena carjacks a man, much to Natasha's dismay, and the chase resumes. They quickly take out the pursuing widow. However, the respite is brief as the Taskmaster is back. The Taskmaster pops out of the top of the APC and takes aim with her bow and arrow. Another explosive arrow. Natasha and Yelena's car is lifted into the air and comes crashing down on the APC, which hits the brakes and sends the car crashing upside down into a subway station. Once the car comes to a halt, Natasha and Yelena struggle free and start running. But the Taskmaster isn't far behind. The Taskmaster sees a trail of blood on the ground that leads to an access panel, opens it, and drops down into it. Up above, we see an air vent where Natasha and Yelena are hiding. They breathe a sigh of relief, and Yelena asks Natasha to tell the story of Dreykov's death. We cut to a flashback of Natasha sitting in a car watching Dreykov's daughter enter a building to go see her father. Clint Barton calls over the radio to confirm that Dreykov is in the building. Seeing the daughter at Dreykov's desk, Natasha says they are good to go. We then see the reflection of an explosion on Natasha's window and a look of regret on Natasha's face. Back in the here and now, Natasha and Yelena are out of the subway air duct and have found a place to have an exposition dump. Yelena tells Natasha that the antidote was made by someone from Melena's generation. Melena was their fake mom in Ohio. She tells Natasha that Natasha was indoctrinated using psychological conditioning, but that the Red Room is using chemical mind control now, and that it alters brain function so that the widow is conscious but unsure of what part is her. That only 1 in 20 survive the process to become a slave of Dreykov. Natasha decides that Dreykov has to be taken down and asks Yelena if she wants to help. Yelena agrees, but she doesn't know where the Red Room is. They decide they need Alexei, their fake dad, in Ohio, if they are to find Dreykov. They get Mason to get a helicopter for them, and they are off to get Alexei. It turns out that Alexei is in prison. He goes to a guard post to see if he has any mail. He gets his mail and discovers that someone sent him a Red Guardian action figure. He pulls the string on the back and it says a slogan, and then the head pops off, revealing a container. He opens the container to see an earbud and puts it in his ear. Natasha says hello and tells him to get to a certain wing of the prison because they're going to break him out. Alexei grabs the two guards and knocks them out and then starts heading for the exit. Natasha uses her computer to start unlocking gates so that Alexei can make it outside. Guards start shooting at the helicopter. Yelena is like, "Aw, hell no," puts the helicopter on autopilot, grabs a rocket launcher, and smokes the guard tower. The noise from the explosion then causes an avalanche in the nearby mountains, and now we have a racing clock to get out before the avalanche hits. The helicopter swings around as the avalanche nears. Mist and fog obscure our view, but at the last moment Natasha emerges with Alexei hanging on for dear life. The helicopter pulls up and away from the prison, but not before Alexei bids them a fond farewell. With that done, Natasha wants to get down to business and ask where Dreykov is. Alexei says he doesn't know, that Dreykov, for unknown reasons, put him in prison after the Ohio mission. He says that maybe Melina knows. She was the brains of their little family. He gives Melina's location, and Yelena says that they don't have enough fuel to get there. Alexei says it'll be fine. It's not fine. All three survive and start walking. They arrive at Melina's and she leads them inside. Alexei finds and puts on his old Red Guardian outfit. Melina and Alexei flirt a bit, and Natasha says that they're going to help her find the Red Room. Melina says that you can't defeat a foe that controls people's will. She then gets a computer pad and uses it to call a pig into the room. She then presses a button and the pig stops breathing as a demonstration of just how much control they have. Shortly later, searchlights shine through the windows. It's troops from the Red Room. Alexei is hit by multiple tranquilizer darts. He drops like a rock and Yelena pulls her gun and searches the house. She finds Natasha unconscious in the armory, and then Melina appears. Melina says I'm sorry, and then uses her widow's sting to stun Yelena. The Taskmaster enters, and Melina says let's not keep him waiting. Next up, the infamous Red Room. In the clouds we see a floating base. Once they land, Melina heads to Dreykov's office. They talk about Yelena and Natasha. He wants them back under control. Dreykov then says he knows that she is Natasha, and he takes off her mask. He then tells the Taskmaster to put away her gun, that everything is fine. Down in the cells, the doors open and Alexei and Natasha exit. Natasha is actually Melina. She then uses an earpiece to call Yelena and tell her that she secreted a blade in Yelena's outfit. Yelena gets the blade, cuts herself free, and then quickly dispatches the surgical team as she grabs her mini-pocketed vest and heads out to look for the antidote. Dreykov taunts Natasha. He asks her what was her plan. She replies to kill you and pulls a gun. She can't pull the trigger, however. She draws a knife and she can't bring herself to stab him. He laughs at her and says that as long as she can smell his pheromones, she can do him no harm. Meanwhile, Melina has made her way to the control station and activates the landing procedure for the station. Back in his office, an alarm goes off and Dreykov sees what she has done. He overrides the command and locks the room Melina is in. Natasha starts to insult Dreykov. She says he's a feeble man hiding away in his Red Room. She manages to anger him, and he hits her several times until she falls to the ground, where he kicks her. He says he's the true power in the world and then goes over to his console, activates access to his Black Widows, and shows that they are all across the world, ready to do his bidding. Elsewhere, Yelena finds the antidote and Melina opens a duct to escape the control room. Back in Dreykov's office, he is gloating over how helpless Natasha and her team are. She turns and smiles at him, thanks him for his monologuing, and then breaks her own nose. Now that she can't smell him, she proceeds to beat the stuffing out of him. Melina makes it to the engine room and fires a grenade into the engine works to devastating effect. Natasha is doing a good job on Dreykov until a group of his Black Widows show up. Dreykov says no one can leave until Natasha is dead. He then makes his escape. Natasha and the Widows fight, with Natasha doing well for a while, but soon their numbers get the better of her. Suddenly a grenade wrapped with the antidote is thrown above the fray, showering the Widows with the cure to their enslavement. It's Yelena. The Black Widows ask, "What will we do now?" Natasha says you're free to do what you want. The destruction to the station continues to spread. Yelena and the Widows head for an exit. Natasha stays behind to get the information on all the Black Widows. Once she gets it, she too heads for the exit. More explosions as the station continues to come apart. Melina and Alexei make it to a plane that is knocked off the station and is damaged. Natasha finds the Taskmaster locked in a cell and lets her go. The Taskmaster is about to attack when the floor beneath them tears apart, sending them in different directions. Dreykov gets to a plane, and Yelena isn't far behind. She gets onto the outside of Dreykov's plane and takes her stun sticks out and drops them into the plane's engines. The engine explodes, knocking Yelena off into free fall. The plane then explodes, killing Dreykov. Natasha grabs a handy parachute and dives after Yelena. She catches up to Yelena and puts the parachute on her and opens the chute. Suddenly Nat sees the Taskmaster falling towards them. Nat lets go of Yelena and falls away from her. The Taskmaster plows into Natasha and the two fight and tumble towards the earth. At the last minute, the Taskmaster opens her parachute, slowing their fall enough to survive the hard impact. The two fight for a bit until Natasha breaks a vial and exposes the Taskmaster to the antidote. Natasha goes looking for Yelena and finds her. She tells Yelena that being her sister was real for her too. Yelena is relieved and the two hug. Alexei and Melina show up and they all have a family moment. The widows return and take everybody aboard their plane except for Natasha, who is staying behind to explain things to Secretary Ross, who is about to drive up on the location. Cut to 2 weeks later, Mason and Natasha meet up in the middle of nowhere. He has found her a Quinjet. Natasha says that she has some family to break out of prison and heads to the Quinjet and then flies off on her new mission. And credits. So, that was Black Widow, a movie that I must admit that I had high hopes for, but ultimately was disappointed by. So where did it go wrong? One thing is that most films require a certain level of suspension of disbelief to work, and this is a Marvel film, so you're going to expect a fair amount of that. On the other hand, Black Widow hasn't received a super soldier serum, been bitten by a radioactive spider, or is a god from another world. So she is on the more normal, human end of the spectrum, and yet this film does have a number of WTF moments. Such as the opening segment in which our Russian spies try to escape in a single-engine aircraft to Cuba from Ohio. The plane looks to me to be of the Beechcraft Bonanza variety, and some research shows me that there were two models available in 1996, the A-36 and the B-36. The A-36 has a range of 660 nautical miles, which is the equivalent of 759 miles. This falls well short of the 1,165 miles that is the distance of Columbus, Ohio to Havana, Cuba. Now it isn't said where in Ohio they are, and I chose Columbus since it lies fairly close to the center of Ohio, and this will give us some general numbers to play with. The B-36, on the other hand, does have a range of 1,133 miles. So if their makeshift airport is 32 miles south of Columbus, then it is possible for a single-engine plane to reach Cuba on a single tank of gas. Of course, the likelihood of escaping radar or jet aircraft, it just doesn't seem too likely to me, especially since S.H.I.E.L.D. would send up an AWACS aircraft to find a small aircraft trying to fly under the radar. AWACS has a downward-looking radar. It is designed to see aircraft trying to fly under the radar and has been in service since 1972. So it's possible that the plane could make the distance, but very unlikely that it would escape detection or capture. And then there's Secretary Ross and the worldwide manhunt for Natasha. It plays absolutely no part in the film in any real fashion. Nat does move to BFE Norway, but at no time does she change her appearance until sneaking into the Red Room. Here she is blending in when she goes to Budapest, versus how everyone has seen her in the Battle of New York. Some difference, huh? Natasha is an Avenger. Yelena even notes that Natasha has been on the cover of magazines. They have a big car chase in Budapest with an APC chasing them. They crash into a subway. Look at how many people are there. No one has a cell phone. There's no CCTV. Ross only shows up at the end of the film because Nat activates her tracker. And he shows up by ground travel when he should have had some form of air support, since Nat supposedly activated it when she got to the Red Room. And as we know, the Red Room was a flying base. And how does he even show up? Natasha was on the base for what, like an hour before she destroyed it? We're supposed to believe that Ross was only an hour away? Please. And then we have Natasha's first encounter with the Taskmaster. If the Taskmaster is after the antidote, why the heck does she fire an explosive arrow at Natasha's car? Just look at the scene of the explosion. I find it difficult to believe that an explosion that is strong enough to cause this car to flip several times isn't also strong enough to shred the car with shrapnel. And if recovery of the antidote is so important, why use explosives? And if it isn't, then why not just ram Nat's car off of the bridge? Also, how did the Taskmaster know that Natasha had the antidote anyways? Last Dreykov knew it was with the Yelena. And then there is the fight. Throughout most of the fighting they do on the bridge, the Taskmaster has the edge over Natasha. And I can understand not killing her if you think she has the antidote and you don't know where it is. But once you identify the antidote's location, Natasha becomes an impediment. When the Taskmaster turns away from Natasha to look at the car to see the vials, just wow. Who turns their back on an opponent? And then there's the scene in which Nat uses her grappling hook to pull the Taskmaster away. When I saw it, I couldn't figure out what's happening. This is how we've seen Natasha's wrist-fired grappling hook work in the past. It shoots out of her wrist gauntlet and wraps around something to support her weight and is used as a swing. Presumably there's a winch in it to pull her up as well, considering the way she uses it with the Taskmaster. But then how did she manage that when she fired it to wrap it around the Taskmaster's leg? Are there two grappling hooks? One for the bridge and one for the Taskmaster's leg? And how's the Taskmaster swinging back towards Natasha when the line is retracting to pull her up to the bridge? They show us that it looks like the winch pulled so hard that the Taskmaster was lifted above the bridge truss, handily giving the line some slack to cut. Since the line was retracting, it should now be too short for the Taskmaster to swing close enough to the ground to cause sparks with her sword, let alone to get back to Natasha. Also, the line is not taut when she grabs it, so she should fall straight down until the line is taut, and that would be very jarring, and the line would likely pull free from her hand. The scene just doesn't make any sense to me at all. Then there's the fight scene between Natasha and Yelena in Budapest. Natasha is there to see if the vials are somehow connected to her long-lost sister and maybe get the lowdown on the stuff in the vials. Yelena, for her part, wants Natasha to have one of her science friends figure out what the antidote is and how to make more so they can free all the Black Widows. The way Natasha got the vials in the first place was that Mason left it in a box with her mail from Budapest on the floor next to the door of her trailer in Norway. He didn't say, "Oh yeah, this person I'm putting up in your safe house in Budapest wanted you to have this." No, he said it was some leftover mail that he brought because he was subletting the apartment to someone else. And don't get me started on subletting a safe house, as that is a different issue. When Natasha and Yelena see each other, they know who each other is because there's no, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" moment. They voice their distrust of one another, and then a fight breaks out, even though there's no reason for it. At this point in the film, Natasha believes Dreykov to be dead, and the Red Room is no more. She never checked up on Yelena, so other than knowing that she has the training of a Black Widow, she knows nothing about her. Is she a good guy? A bad guy? Who knows? And the same could almost be said of Yelena, that she knows nothing of Natasha, other than that she got out of the Red Room and is now an Avenger. Someone who has helped save the world from an alien invasion and a genocidal robot. I don't understand why Yelena would be distrustful of Natasha. We don't get any more moments of them interacting in the Red Room. Was there some sort of sisterly rivalry there? Were they in the same class? Unlikely, as Natasha is 5 years older, and Yelena will later explain that Natasha underwent psychological conditioning and that Yelena underwent chemical. But who knows, as this is never explained. What we have here are two deadly killers pointing guns at each other in search of answers. Personally, I think it's a good time for questions. So what do? Fight. And quite brutally, too. Nothing says help me find out what this is like grabbing a knife. Yelena is an interesting story. I heard arguments that she isn't much of a hero due to her lack of concern when she caused the avalanche at the prison while breaking Alexei out. It occurs to me that in order to be an effective killer, you're going to have a poorly developed sense of empathy. And chemical conditioning would certainly explain the lack of empathy. At this point, however, she has been exposed to the antidote, so her sense of empathy should be working. You could say that it is a case of the classic Russian stoicism that shit happens and breaking Alexei out takes precedence over the lives of the others at the prison. Still, she takes more glee in it than I care for, and it isn't the stuff that heroes are made of. Which leads me to think about one of the big themes of the film, family. Yelena and Natasha have a brief argument at the table in Melina's house because Nat says that they were never family. Yelena says it was real to me and storms off. I find it interesting that she feels no sense of family with the girls that she trained with. The military is famous for it. Sure, the widows aren't military, but they're trained in a similar fashion. Esprit de corps and all of that. The sense of brotherhood, and in this case, sisterhood, that is developed through shared experience and hardship. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. I guess band of sisters in this case. Back when they were having beers in Budapest, Nat has to ask Yelena if she wants to join to take Dreykov down. Yelena doesn't offer up a, "we have to free my sisters," or, free the others speech or argument to get Nat to want to take down Dreykov. And I find it funny that she scoffed at Nat earlier when she asked Nat why she didn't come looking for her after she killed Dreykov. Yelena sent Nat the antidote with no explanation as to what it was, or any information that Dreykov in the Red Room was still in business. Nope, she was hiding in Budapest where she thought Nat wouldn't come looking. I take it that she was done with the Red Room and the Black Widows. Not my problem now. The Avengers can deal with it. This would be the same Avengers that just had a civil war with half of them either in jail or on the run, one of which was her big sister Natasha. Nat has to ask first, and Yelena's response is not, "It will be great to free the others and get Dreykov." Nope, it's simply, "It sounds like it could be fun." Florence Pugh did a good job with the role, but I'm not sure I'm interested in seeing more of her character as written. Her Black Widow isn't worried about or bothered by collateral damage. Then there's Alexei. Why, oh why, do Natasha and Yelena think that breaking Alexei out of prison is a good idea? They get the location of the prison and the access codes to the prison software, and yet they don't get any history on Alexei's length of stay or who put him in there and why. Sure, he leads them to Melina, and she knows where the Red Room is, but they give no indication that Alexei and Melina stayed in contact. Quite frankly, why would she? If she's still working for Dreykov, then it would be unlikely that she would stay in contact with someone who has gotten on Dreykov's bad side. So how does Mr. Prisoner for 20 to 21 years know where she is and that she's still working with Dreykov? Which leads us to Melina. Alexei called her the brains of the family. As we come to see in the film, she is involved with developing the chemical mind control and is still continuing her work on livestock. And not only is she a neurobiologist chemist, she is an engineer, as she helped design the holding cells of the Red Room. She also seems to have a good understanding of the control systems too. And she's been through the Red Room 4 times getting Black Widow training, making her a triple threat. So why is she helping Yelena and Natasha again? They were a family for 3 years, 21 years ago? Melina says that she's a mouse on a wheel and running on the wheel is all she knows. Natasha says that she has a choice and that's it. Psychological conditioning over. And since Dreykov switched to the chemical conditioning after Natasha left, why isn't Melina under the chemical conditioning? Why doesn't Yelena or Natasha confront Melina over the fact that she allowed Dreykov to put them into the Red Room training program? She knew how bad it was, having been through it herself, where she helped develop the chemical conditioning that Yelena would undergo, turning her into a killing machine against her will. There was potential for a very emotional scene filled with recriminations and regret and a desire for redemption, and we didn't really get that scene. Can you imagine something along the lines of, they're gathered around the table and Melina explains, I thought we were making a better world. The things we know about the human mind now, we can bring peace and order and equity to the world. Yelena says, you were creating monsters. She starts to tear up. I killed a sister in Morocco. We went through the Red Room together, served on many missions together. She saved my life in Venice during one mission. And I gutted her like a fish because Dreykov made me. I didn't want to. I tried my best not to. And then she breaks down sobbing. She looks at Melina with hatred. There's your better world. Melina stammers a weak, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Yelena replies, how could you not? Absolute control over someone's mind and you'd think they wouldn't turn people into slaves? And you're still helping that bastard, even now. Melina looks shocked and dumbfounded, at a loss. Disgusted, Yelena then gets up and storms off. Melina looks to Natasha, weakly offers another, I didn't know. Natasha coldly says, you do now. You, me, we had a choice. I chose to leave, to do something better with my life. You have that choice too. Yelena was just a slave. She didn't have a choice. The other widows are still slaves too. But with this, and she holds up the antidote, we can make a difference. We can fix this. Help us. What do I know? And there's the conditioning itself. We have 2 types, psychological and chemical. Psychological conditioning I understand. It makes sense to me. It is the repetitive exposure to what you want the subject to believe. If you start early enough, you can shape the moral values of the subject as well. The big problem with psychological conditioning is that it involves free choice by the subject. They make their choices based off of what they know. But should they come into contact with new information that conflicts with their old information and the new information proves to be more accurate, there is a chance that the subject will break their conditioning. Famously, in the movie Logan's Run, the society is taught from birth that once their life clock starts flashing on their 30th birthday, it is time for renewal. They go to Carousel and are killed only to renew and be born again. Logan and Jessica go outside the city's boundaries and their life clocks go clear and they meet an old man and they now realize that it was all a lie, a means of population control. Their psychological conditioning is broken.
The life clocks have no power outside. We're free.
Hence the need for chemical conditioning. The chemical conditioning is supposed to give Dreykov absolute control over the subject, so much so that they will stop breathing or commit suicide. So no defections. This conditioning makes no sense to me with regards to how they describe it. You're awake, but you're not in control? It would make more sense to me if there were electronic implants that might disrupt or stimulate the neural pathways, thus giving you control. And that would jive with the computer pads we see Melina and Dreykov using to control their subjects. As it is, I'm not sure why they call it chemical conditioning, because all we ever see in the movie looks like surgical procedures to me. You have images of surgeons gathered around a table, they're drawing lines on girls' foreheads where they are going to make the incisions, and at no time do I see any Black Widows taking pills or shots to maintain adequate serum levels of these chemicals. But there's another reason for the chemical conditioning. When Johansson agreed to do a solo Black Widow film, she wanted to address the Me Too movement. Hence we get a story about a domineering man who forces girls to do things against their will in his bid for power. If they are trained using psychological conditioning, well, a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old, they don't know any better. They haven't seen the world and have almost no life experience. But you jump forward 10, 20 years where they have had extensive hand-to-hand and weapons training and they have become high-level assassin. Well, it's kind of hard to be a strong, empowered, lethal weapon and be a victim. So we have to have the chemical conditioning. Your mind is trapped in the body, helplessly watching yourself commit various atrocities and unable to prevent it. That would be horrific indeed. I can't say I'm surprised that the story didn't have much more obvious connections to the Me Too movement, such as having Dreykov being present for or engaging in, let's call it, seduction technique instruction of the widows. Or even having Yelena say something like, "He did things to me that still give me nightmares," as I'm sure that's a bit too unpleasant for a Disney production. It's certainly something they don't want to be associated with. So we end up with a watered-down attempt at a message/action movie. Watered down so much that I had to go back and rewatch the family reunion scene again to notice that Yelena takes a mild jab at Melina, saying, "I was chemically subjugated." She doesn't elaborate any more on that, as her anger is with Natasha, saying that they aren't a real family. So, those are some of my complaints, that the film is a mostly generic action flick that could have been so much more. Anyways, thank you for watching.